Today we'll be testing the RTX 3080 in Cyberpunk. So you can see that this is the normal 3080, not a Ti. This is also the low hash rate card, even though with the latest 522.25 drivers, apparently the hash limiter has been removed, but not that it makes any difference in games. As you can see, I've got the latest driver, and then we're pairing it with a 12700K. The memory, we've got 32 gigabytes of DDR4 running at 3600 megahertz. And we'll be starting our testing on 1080p, and we're going to play with the presets, except we're going to disable FSR. So if you enable high preset, you'll see that FSR is automatically enabled. That's just dumb. So let's just disable that. And what I'm going to do is I'm right outside of V's apartment, and we're just going to run around in this circle here, cause some mayhem, and drive around it a little bit and adjust the graphical settings. Right, so there's our frame rate counter, although I don't think that is correct. You can see quite a lot of shimmering in the background, so that is one of the issues with the latest version of Cyberpunk, is that sometimes it doesn't apply the settings. Right, so what we can do is let's just enable DLSS and disable it and apply. Sometimes the apply button is not there, and the settings don't really take effect. It looks a little bit better now. The frame rate also dropped, so we should be good. Right, I'm just going to start the benchmark run here. You can see in the top left-hand corner, we've got our GPU usage, all the statistics there, CPU usage, temps, and then the frame rate. Right, so we've got the average, the 1% low, and the 0.1% lows, as well as the frame time graph. The frame time graph will show us if there's any stuttering that we can't pick up, though we should be able to pick up the stuttering with the 1% and 0.1% lows. So for those of you who don't really know what the 1% and 0.1% lows mean, for the 1% low number, that just means that your game will run at this frame rate or higher for 99% of the time. The same goes for the 0.1% lows. Your game will run at that frame rate or higher for 99.9% of the time. Right, you can see here we've got, we're staying above 100 frames per second. Most of the time I did see it drop down to about 97 there. So let's see what happens if we start a little bit of fighting here. Right, so it did drop down to about 95 again. Just so you know, my crowd density is set to medium. Crowds are actually quite intensive in this area, or in this game. This is a pretty intensive area, as you can see. The drivers are pretty intense as well. So this is at 1080p high preset with the FSR disabled, obviously, and we're getting quite decent frame rates. The GPU usage is staying in the high 90s, so that means we're not the CPU bottlenecked a lot, even though we are leaving about 10% of the performance on the table here. Running around in this game is not as intensive as driving, so I'm just gonna try and get in my car without it exploding and just drive around a little bit. I don't think we're gonna make it though. Just drive around a little bit. You'll see the frame rate fluctuate a little bit the moment you start driving. If I can actually just stay on the road, we're just going to drive up to the intersection here, and we're going to make a very nice U-turn, and down we go. I mean, the frame rate actually stayed quite stable above 100, so that's not too bad. And as I say that, it drops down to the mid 90s, and my car is pretty much broken. Alright, so that's it for this run. Let's up the quality preset to Ultra. So as you can see, with the high preset, it enables FSR, and with the Ultra preset, it disables it. So that's where we want to be. Once again, there's no apply button, so I'm just going to enable DLSS and disable DLSS. Right, just to make sure we are on the Ultra preset, and I'm just going to reload my save. Right, and we are back again in front of our apartment. We don't have any police chasing us, so that's good. And you can see we are getting pretty much the same FPS on Ultra as we did on High. That's actually pretty strange. That's probably because of the new driver. Nvidia claims that it can boost your performance by up to 24% in this game, depending on your settings. And it seems like it improved CPU bound scenarios quite a bit. We aren't heavily CPU bound, but I mean, we're not fully GPU bound yet, so maybe that helps a little bit. But as you can see, there's very little difference between high and ultra at this resolution. That should change once we bump it up to 1440p and 4K, but I'm not entirely sure. I haven't tested it with the new driver yet at all these resolutions. I'm just gonna drive around a little bit and see how the FPS holds up. I'm just going to follow the same path, just going to try and make a U-turn here without crashing. This police car just does not handle well. Anyway, so we are still getting in that 95 to 110 frames per second. We've got an average of 103, 73%, 73 FPS, sorry, in the 1% lows, and 0.1% lows are sitting at 51. Now those are proportional, and we died at the exact same spot. Look at that. Who says you can't recreate accurate benchmarks in game? Right, so there we have it for the 1080p Ultra. So I'm just gonna switch on ray tracing. I'm not gonna go with different presets in the ray tracing. I'm just gonna enable ray tracing Ultra and DLSS quality. So as you can see with ray tracing Ultra, we've got DLSS on auto. I'm just gonna force it to quality, and you can see here we are still at 1080p. Right, now I just need to load my save again. Right, and we're back as if nothing's happened. We've got around 70 to 80 frames per second with ray tracing enabled. Obviously you can boost that by changing the DLSS setting. You can go to balance, performance, ultra performance, etc. When you play at 1080p, I prefer not to use DLSS, but then obviously you should also not be running RT if you want higher frame rates. Let's just show you what the performance is like without DLSS for this preset. So we've got DLSS on off and no FSR. Right, so we were about in the 80s and now we're down to below 60. So Cyberpunk is a pretty intensive game. It's a pretty intense game as well, but on your graphics card it's not kind once you enable ray tracing, which is a bit of a shame because the game really looks pretty good with ray tracing enabled. But then again, this game supports ray traced lighting, shadows, reflections. There's quite a few things that this game supports that others don't. That's why it's so computationally expensive once you enable ray tracing. So this to me is not really playable. I prefer to play first-person shooter games at 60 frames per second or above. I know we're getting close to that. Let's just reset the counter here. But we are dropping down quite a bit below 60, and it is noticeable, especially in the input lag. So I'm just going to go back to DLSS and just to show you what the performance is like. Right, so now we're back into the mid 80s, high 70s. So it's this is definitely much more playable. But as I said, you do start to notice the image quality deterioration once you enable DLSS on 1080p. It's the DLSS implementation in this game is actually done pretty well. So it's not like a jarring artifact or blurriness or whatever. There is some ghosting with DLSS. In other games there's less ghosting when it comes to DLSS, but I mean it is what it is. So there we go. I mean that average is definitely not right. Well, we can say that we got about 75 frames per second average, about 1 death per run. That's also not a bad average. Anyway, that's it for 1080p. Let's move on to 1440p. Right, so here we are at 1440p, and once again our frames per second is quite a lot higher than it was at 1080p. Let's see, that's not right. Even though we've got our custom preset here, it's because we've got FSR is set to auto. So once again, if you set it to high, this just goes on to whatever it wants. All right, so now we're at 1440p native and the high preset. Right, and that looks a little bit better. So we're getting about 85 frames per second here. Let's start the benchmark counter. Just gonna run around a little bit here. You can see that our GPU usage is peaked at about 95-96%. I mean, it does not really indicate a CPU bottleneck. If it goes below 93, 92%, then sure, it's not your CPU is holding your GPU back a little bit, but I wouldn't be too concerned about 95%. And yeah, you can see that with our higher resolutions and higher graphical settings, our 1% lows and 0.1% lows are actually pretty respectable. It's much more closer to the average frames per second, which just indicates a pretty smooth gameplay experience. I mean, it's we do drop below 80 at times, but I've got a variable refresh rate monitor, so I don't feel it that much, and this is actually a pretty good experience. So let's see what happens to the frame rate once we start killing some people. Right, so we are still in the 80s. There's not a lot of cops here yet, so frame rate is not affected too much yet. Now they start piling in, and they just appear still out of nowhere. I know it's been fixed, air quotes, but I mean, I've got a lot of criticisms of this game, but it is one of my favorite games. Even with all the bugs, I actually played it since day one. I found the bugs a lot more funny than what most people found it. But it's a pretty good game. Since patch 1.6 came out, it's become even more enjoyable. Right, this is once again, I'm not really losing health, maybe a little bit, but nothing to be concerned about. Usually by this time I'd be long dead. If I'm in a car, I'd be dead. But yeah, so there we go. So at 1440p high preset, we got an average of 85. 1% lows at 65 and 0.1% low at 58. Let's up this to ultra. I think we'll see a little bit of a performance drop with the ultra compared to what we saw at 1080p. Alright, so we're on ultra, DLSS off, FSR off, and 1440p. I'm just going to load my save again. Alright, so here we are, 1440p ultra, and we lost about 10 frames per second. It's still not it's not feeling too different. It's feeling quite okay. I mean, you can still get an above 60 frames per second experience pretty much all the time here, with the lows and 0.1% lows proportional to the average. So that's actually very nice. Once again, very little stuttering going on here, little to none actually. Not noticing anything, and doesn't improve my shooting at all. Anyway, so this is at 1440p ultra, and you can see we're about 10 to 15 frames per second lower than what we were at high. It's going to drive around a little bit. It's still pretty much a 60 frames per second experience. We did drop down to the mid 50s there, so it's not a locked 60 FPS experience. You will definitely find some areas where it'll drop below that. Still, all in all, it's not bad. Right, so now we are going to just enable ray tracing 1440p. Once again, we just enable the ray tracing. I'm just going to go with the ultra preset here. Once again, DLSS on quality, and let's see how it goes. All right, so we're back, and 1440p ray tracing ultra, getting around 60 frames per second. It does dip below 60 more often than the previous graphical settings, but this is still quite nice. I mean, if you are into very accurate reflections, if you look in the glass here, you'll see the buildings behind us in the reflections. That's very nice. You can see the lighting is a little bit improved, so are the shadows. But once again, the ray tracing trade-off when it comes to performance, personally to me in this game, is just not worth it. I'm not one to run around and stopping to look at what's in reflections. When I start playing a new title with ray tracing, I usually enable it. I see what it looks like, play around for 10 minutes, then I just disable ray tracing, and I enjoy the game at a much higher frame rate. That said, there are some games where ray tracing is implemented and the performance hit is not that bad, but as I said, those usually have only one or two elements of ray tracing, either reflections or shadows or lighting. It's very rare to find games that have all the elements of ray tracing like Cyberpunk does, and that's why it's so heavy on the GPU. Right, this is not, I mean, it's not bad. I wouldn't really like to play at this purely because, yeah, we are getting 60 frames per second here, but when you get to more intensive areas, you'll definitely see more of a performance hit. So I think what we should do for this is try DLSS balanced. Right, so with DLSS balanced, we are now still in the high 60s. Hasn't dropped below 60 yet. There we go, 60 on the dot. It's still looking good. It feels a little bit more responsive. The frame rate seems to stay above 60 at all times, which is quite good. I mean, let's just start a gunfight here. Let's see what happens when we get some more action going on here. Right. And lots of people running around here. We actually just had an autosave happen there. That's why the 0.1% lows dropped like that. This game autosaves every 5 minutes or every 10 minutes. Not sure, so let's just reset that. But yeah, you can see that even with DLSS balanced, we are dropping below 60 frames per second. I mean, one other thing that we can do is maybe use the ray tracing medium preset, DLSS balanced. What that does is it actually disables ray traced reflections and it sets the ray trace lighting to medium. Let's see if that can save our frame rate. We are still dropping below 60, so it's not ideal. Alright, that's why I say just disable ray tracing if you want a high refresh rate experience. If you want it to look good and don't mind dropping below 60, then ray tracing might just work for you. Alright, so last round of test, we're going to up the resolution to 4K, and once again we are going to go through the same settings here. We'll go with the high preset and move our way up. Once again, high preset, but FSR disabled. So I accidentally only clicked twice. Anyway, let's see what it does now. Alright, so now we're at 4K native, and we're getting 40 frames per second. I mean, it's not terrible for what this game has to offer when it comes to visuals, but I personally wouldn't play like this. As I mentioned, I prefer a high refresh rate experience, and for some reason my crosshair actually disappeared there for a second. Right, so just running around this circle here, we are getting 40 frames per second, but once again you can see that the lows are very close to the averages, so there's no stuttering going on here. This is on the 4K high preset, so let's go to ultra and let's see. Right, so ultra doesn't have DLSS, doesn't have FSR. Right, and now we're in business. Now we are in console territory. Let's just reset the numbers there. And so we're getting above 30 frames per second at all times. It's not terrible. If you don't mind a 30 frames per second experience, then you can definitely play at 4K native. I wouldn't, but it's possible. I mean, we've got motion blur enabled as well, as you can see, and at this low frame rate, this just makes me nauseous. The motion blur is enabled on all the presets, or most of the presets. I didn't change that. Personally, I disable it when I play, but for this we just wanted to use the presets just to make it a little bit easier to replicate and to remember all our settings. Right, so we've got 30 frames per second average there. Let's see what DLSS can do for us. I don't think DLSS quality is going to make much difference. We might see about 20-25% performance increase, so let's go for the balance preset right off the bat. Let's reset that, and we are getting about 45-50 frames per second. I mean, we are probably going to die now, so this whole run might just be invalidated. Let's just get some numbers here quickly, some benchmark numbers. So we're getting about 50 frames per second average. it's not bad, definitely not great. So let's see what we can do with ultra performance. I think, right, ultra performance at 4K, and finally we are back in the 80s. Right, at this point you should just lower your resolution. There's no real point in playing in ultra performance for me personally. It's being upscaled from 720p. It just leaves too much room for error. So I mean, DLSS is quite great, but I mean, it's not perfect, especially when it has as little info to go with as it does at ultra performance. So I mean, it doesn't look too bad. It looks quite sharp, but at this point I'd rather just play at 1440p native. Right, this is still without ray tracing, so let's just load my game so we can do a proper benchmark. Right, so as you can see, there's a lot of shimmering happening there. If you zoom in, it disappears a little bit, but if you look at it, there's shimmering there where my gun is pointed at. There at the data ink sign, there's a lot of shimmering there as well, which disappears when you disable DLSS. And let's see, even if on quality, it should disappear. So that's the trade-off of running DLSS at lower or higher settings, depending on how you look at it. So on ultra performance, you do see a lot of shimmering, a lot of aliasing, and it's just not ideal. Right, so let's go to the ray tracing medium settings. We are going to have DLSS on quality, and the medium, as shown before, ray trace reflections are disabled, as well as ray traced lighting is set to medium. Right, so this is 4K RT medium preset. Let's see. I mean, we are now getting 30 frames per second. Pretty much what we got at 4K native, maybe a little bit less than 4K native on ultra. Let's just start the benchmark counter there. It is dipping below 30 frames per second every now and again, like there, 29. I mean, at this point it's just a blurry mess when you move around due to the motion blur, and also the input latency is pretty high. As you can see, it's about 30 to 35 milliseconds to render each frame, and that just adds to the input latency. All right, I mean, I've pretty much had enough of this one. Let's see if we can get close to 60 at least. So once again, we are just going to use DLSS Ultra Performance, and let's see how high that pushes the frame rate. Well, there we go. So we are actually above 60. Once again, it'll look like crap, objects in the distance. We can have a look at that same lighting. If we look at the lighting there, I mean, that just looks terrible. I'm not trying to be too judgmental towards DLSS. I mean, the technology is quite good. If you don't mind artifacting and aliasing like that, then it is a very nice bump in performance. But it's just a shame that in this game you have to run at the ultra performance preset or ultra performance DLSS to be able to play at 4K with the ray tracing. Right, I think we are going to die now. Once again, I'm recovering health, and I don't know why. I know that after one of the recent patches, the perks and everything got reset. I haven't selected any new perks yet, so not entirely sure why I'm not dying as quickly as I should. Alright, but we're going to leave it here as I explode. And that's it for our Cyberpunk RTX 3080 video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and as always, we hope to see you in the next one.